The Galactic Council Hall had never been this quiet, not in its long, ancient history, not even when wars were declared or when empires were born and died in the space of one meeting. The hall itself was older than most stars, carved into a floating citadel above a dying sun. A place where hundreds of alien species came together to decide who would rise and who would be crushed. It was a place of arrogance, power, and fear, but not tonight. Tonight there was something else in the air. Something heavy and cold, the kind of silence that comes when a predator steps into the forest and everything else goes still. The great chamber stretched for miles, its ceiling a black mirror filled with artificial stars, the floor polished like glass. The rows of delegates formed like concentric rings, each one filled with rulers, warlords, scientists, and soldiers, all watching the center of the hall where a single landing platform was opening like the mouth of a beast. For centuries, whenever a new species entered the Council's orbit, they came with fear in their bones and forced smiles on their faces. Their leaders bowed low, spoke with trembling voices, and begged to be spared from the political games they didn't yet understand. But Earth was not like the others. The humans did not send a fleet of begging diplomats. They did not come with flowers or banners or endless speeches. They sent a single ship, a black vessel with no flag, no anthem, no escort, just silent metal cutting through the void like a blade. The Council's security fleets scanned it 1,000 times, expecting hidden weapons or cloaked warships. But there was nothing, just that single vessel, steady and calm. That alone made the Council nervous, because weakness always comes with noise, but true power comes quietly. The landing platform hissed, steam curling into the cold air like breath from a sleeping monster. Every alien eye turned toward it. The great screens above zoomed in. The doors of the black ship opened slowly, not because it was broken, but because whoever commanded it wanted the Council to feel the weight, to feel the silence press against their throats. And then he appeared. A single man. He was tall, wrapped in a plain black uniform. No medals, no armor, no weapons in sight. His boots clicked once against the metal ramp, and that single sound echoed through the entire chamber like a gunshot. He didn't bow. He didn't wave. He didn't rush. He simply walked forward, each step measured, steady, like a soldier who had already seen too much war to be impressed by anyone sitting above him. The delegates leaned forward in their seats, their antennae twitching, their scales shimmering, their breath rattling softly. This was not what they expected. They expected fear. They expected desperation. They got silence. At the far end of the chamber, the Andrix Prime Speaker leaned back on his throne, his long, serpentine face curling into something that looked like amusement. His voice slithered through the hall like smoke as he spoke. A single human? Is this Earth's idea of a joke? A ripple of laughter followed from the inner circles of the Council. Sharp, cold laughter that didn't reach the edges of the hall. Many of them had burned worlds, ended civilizations, erased species who dared stand alone. To them, Earth was nothing, a primitive world that had only recently started walking among the stars. But even as they mocked, none of them could look away from the man walking toward the center. There was something in his walk, in his stillness, something that made the oldest predators feel uneasy. The guards at the base of the speaker's throne shifted their weight without realizing it. Even the machines embedded into the walls seemed to hum a little louder. The human stopped when he reached the center, standing alone under the burning light of the star dome, surrounded by thousands of alien eyes. The speaker tilted his head. "Where is your council, human?" he hissed. "Where is your escort? Where is your army?" The man lifted his gaze, calm, unblinking, his voice low but clear as he spoke for the first time. "I don't need an escort," he said slowly. "I'm enough." The laughter returned, louder now, rolling through the chamber like thunder made of mockery. But behind that laughter was something else. A question that none of them dared to speak yet. Who walks into the most powerful council in the galaxy alone? Who looks at warlords and kings and doesn't blink? The speaker leaned forward, narrowing his slit-like eyes. Bold words from a small world, he sneered. "We expected you to kneel, not to make jokes." The man didn't move. He didn't smile. His heartbeat was steady, his hands relaxed at his sides. He wasn't here to make them understand him. He was here to make them remember him. The council chamber was massive, filled with voices that had shaped the fate of entire star clusters. But right then, none of that power seemed to matter. The air vibrated around the human, the way air does before a storm breaks. A few of the older species, the ones who had fought wars in the void, recognized that feeling instantly. The feeling of someone who doesn't come to bargain. He comes to warn. The human stopped at the exact center of the floor. A circular platform rose beneath his boots, lifting him slightly higher so that everyone could see him clearly. The light caught the cold edge of his expression. He wasn't angry. He wasn't afraid. He was something far worse. He was sure. The speaker opened his mouth to speak again, but before he could, the human placed a small black case on the ground beside him, the sound of metal against the glass floor echoing in perfect silence. No one knew what was inside. Weapons? A message? A surrender? The tension thickened, pressing against the chest of every delegate. Around the chamber, massive screens showed his face. Calm, steady, cold. An alien general from the Zarth Dominion leaned toward another delegate and whispered, "Why would they send just one?" "Because they're weak," the other hissed back. But even as he said it, his mandibles clicked nervously. The human's gaze lifted slowly, sweeping across the room. Not hurried, not searching, just looking, like a hunter scanning prey. His voice, when it came again, was quiet enough to make the hall lean in. "Earth doesn't kneel," he said. That single sentence felt like a spark thrown into dry grass. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't wrapped in speeches. It just was. Some aliens laughed again. Some didn't. The speaker tilted his head further, studying him now like something dangerous he couldn't quite define. The council had faced thousands of species over millennia, each one desperate to join their empire, each one willing to trade pride for protection. But this was different. Earth had sent no emissaries, no diplomats with shaky hands. It sent a single man who walked into their temple of power and said nothing they expected to hear. And the strangest thing of all was that he wasn't bluffing. They didn't know how they could tell, but they could feel it in their bones. In the shadows near the far wall, one of the oldest species in the council, a creature whose world had been burned centuries ago, whispered a warning to itself, its voice too soft for anyone else to hear. "The last time I saw eyes like that," it whispered, "a world burned down an empire." The black case at the man's feet pulsed once, a tiny flash of blue light along its edges, and the laughter in the room faltered just slightly. The speaker narrowed his eyes. "What is that?" The man didn't answer. He didn't need to. That was the moment when the mood of the chamber changed. Not a big, loud shift. Just a small one, like the soft tilt of a blade against a throat. The laughter didn't sound as strong now. Some of the aliens leaned back. Some stopped moving entirely. The speaker exhaled slowly. "Human," he hissed, "you stand before the council. Be careful with your next words." The man looked up at the towering speaker, calm as a man staring at the horizon, his hands loose, his voice steady. "I already chose them before I came here." For the first time in centuries, the mighty Galactic Council was no longer laughing. And somewhere, deep beneath that polished floor, the quiet hum of hidden systems stirred, as if the galaxy itself had leaned forward to listen to what this human would say next. The speaker's throne loomed over the center of the chamber like a crown made of steel and teeth. His long neck craned forward as he let out a slow, ugly hiss that filled the silence like smoke, and one by one the other delegates began to chuckle, the kind of low, cruel laughter that didn't need words to carry its meaning. The laughter of predators who believed they'd already won. The human stood perfectly still at the center of the chamber, not reacting, not blinking, just standing there with that same quiet strength. And that only made them laugh harder because arrogance blinds the powerful long before fear wakes them up. The speaker's translator lit up as his voice slithered through the room. "Look at this little creature, alone, fragile, soft. A world of dirt and water sending a single man to speak to us. How adorable." The chamber filled with laughter that rose like a tide, sharp and cold. Some delegates even leaned forward with wide, gleaming eyes, expecting him to stumble, to beg, to break. The human didn't speak, and that silence cut through the noise sharper than any weapon. His breathing was steady, his shoulders square, his boots planted like stone on the polished floor, and with every passing second his quiet made their laughter sound weaker, thinner, like a sound trying too hard to fill a space it no longer owned. The Andric speaker rose to his feet, his tall skeletal frame towering, his skin a cold shade of green that shimmered under the star-domed ceiling. His claws scraped softly against the metal railing as he leaned down toward the man. "Where is your courage, human?" he mocked. "Where are your leaders? Did Earth truly believe that one soft creature could scare the council of 1,000 empires?" His voice was amplified through the speakers, wrapping around the chamber like a predator circling its prey. The human's jaw tightened, just slightly, not in fear but in something else, something far quieter and far more dangerous. "One is enough," he said, voice low, even, not a shout but the kind of statement that doesn't need volume to shake walls. That single line did something the speaker didn't expect. The laughter didn't grow louder. It faltered. A small break. A short breath. The speaker's grin twitched. The delegates shifted in their seats. Somewhere in the upper gallery, a four-eyed alien clicked its mandibles nervously. The Krauth warlord, a massive creature plated in bone armor, pounded a fist against the railing, making the floor tremble. "One is not enough for war," he growled, his voice like gravel. "It is enough only for the first body to fall." His words echoed, but the man in the center didn't flinch. He tilted his head slightly, like a predator studying prey that didn't know what kind of trap it had stepped into. Behind the human, the black case pulsed faintly again, a thin blue line crawling across its smooth surface like a heartbeat. The speaker's eyes narrowed. "And what is that?" he demanded, pointing one claw toward it. The human's voice didn't rise, didn't change. "The truth," he said simply. That made a few delegates pause. Truth wasn't a word that carried lightly in this place. The council was built on control, not honesty, and something in the way he said it, like it wasn't a threat, just a fact, made the laughter stop again, slower this time, like a dying engine. The speaker leaned forward, searching his face for fear, but there was none. "Do you understand where you are?" he asked, voice sharper now, less amused. "Do you understand what this place is, human? We decide what lives. We decide what burns. We do not take orders from the mud ball your kind crawled out of." The human tilted his head slightly, almost like he was studying him, like someone who had already walked through worse fires. "I'm not here to give you orders," he replied, each word smooth and steady like a blade being drawn slowly from its sheath. "I'm here to give you a warning." The room erupted again, but it wasn't laughter this time, it was anger. Shouts from alien throats, grinding metal sounds from machines, hisses from scaled warlords. A delegate from the Xerix Confederation slammed its tendrils against the table, spitting out, "Humans think they can warn us." Another one clicked its jaw, "Your planet isn't even mapped beyond the outer belt." The sound rose and fell like a storm of noise, but the man stood like a rock in the center of it all, unmoved, unbothered, unbreakable. The speaker raised his clawed hand and the hall fell silent again, not out of respect but out of order. He leaned in closer. "A warning," he said with slow venom. "You think you can threaten the Council of Worlds? We have erased entire civilizations with less provocation. Do you truly believe your kind is so special?" The man didn't step back. He didn't look away. His eyes locked onto the speakers like two blades meeting in the dark. "No," he said softly, "I don't believe it. I know it." The speaker froze for a split second, something behind his eyes flickering like an old flame trying not to die. A murmur spread through the hall, not loud but sharp, cutting through the arrogance like a knife through silk. The way the man said it, quiet and steady, didn't sound like arrogance. It sounded like certainty. And certainty is what powerful creatures fear most. The Krauth warlord leaned forward again, baring jagged teeth. "Then prove it, human. Prove your little warning is more than a dying world barking at stars it doesn't understand." The man slowly crouched, his hand brushing against the smooth surface of the black case, and the moment his fingers touched it, the humming in the air changed. It wasn't loud, but everyone in the chamber felt it in their bones. It was the sound of something sleeping beneath the surface, something vast, old, and merciless. The speaker frowned. "What are you doing?" The man stood straight again, his hand resting on the top of the case. His voice came out quiet, like a whisper that shouldn't have carried but somehow did, reaching every corner of the chamber. "I'm reminding you," he said, "of what happens to those who cross Earth." For the first time, the council hall didn't sound like a room full of predators. It sounded like prey holding its breath. Even the speaker, wrapped in centuries of power, felt a coldness slip beneath his skin. Something had shifted. It wasn't war yet. It was the moment before it. The moment when the galaxy begins to understand it may not be as untouchable as it thinks. And the human hadn't even opened the case yet. The speaker leaned forward, the faint shimmer of the starlight ceiling reflecting off his long, bone-like jaw as his voice rolled across the chamber like a hiss from something ancient and arrogant. And with that single movement the mood of the council shifted from silence to cruelty, soft whispers rising like smoke through the tiers of alien seats as they mocked the lone human standing at the center. Some laughed softly, others pounded their claws or tendrils against their tables, their arrogance so thick it felt like heat pressing against the walls. This was how it always was when new species arrived here. New voices entered the hall to be swallowed, broken, bent, and forced to obey. But this night, something was different. Something they didn't understand was already crawling through the room, and it was quiet. The man didn't bow, didn't move, didn't lower his eyes. The speaker raised one claw, his voice echoing through the 1,000 translators scattered above. "Human," he sneered, stretching the word as if it were an insult. "Your world is young, small, fragile, and weak. And yet, you stand before us without trembling. Is this foolishness? Or are you simply too ignorant to understand what this place is?" The chamber rippled with cruel laughter again, sharper this time, mixed with the clicking of mandibles, the wet rumble of alien throats, the mechanical chirping of synthetic delegates. They laughed because they believed they had already won. They always did. But the human just stood there, hands loose at his sides, spine straight, gaze fixed on the speaker with no emotion, no fear, nothing. The laughter rolled like a wave, but then something strange happened. It began to lose its strength. It wasn't because anyone spoke. It was because the human didn't. Predators expect their prey to flinch, to react, to make their victory feel real. But he gave them nothing. That silence, unshaken and cold, started to feel like a weight pressing down on the chamber. The Krauth warlord, a monster with 4 arms plated in dark ironbone armor, slammed his massive fist down on his table, the floor trembling beneath it. "Your silence is not strength, little thing," he growled, his voice carrying through the air like thunder. "It is the sound of prey before it is eaten." The man finally lifted his chin slightly, no smile, no shift in his eyes, and said in a quiet voice that somehow reached every corner of the chamber without needing volume, "Prey doesn't warn the hunter." It was a single sentence. No threat, no shouting, just quiet certainty. And it made the laughter falter a second time. The speaker hissed loudly to cut through the sudden stillness. "Do you think Earth matters here?" he snapped, his long claws curling against the railing. "We have erased entire civilizations for less than a whisper. Do you believe your little world can scare the Council of the Galaxy?" The man did not blink. He slowly lifted his hand and placed it on the black case at his feet, the one no one had dared to ask about until now. Its smooth surface pulsed softly with a faint blue light. The room stiffened, not visibly, not loudly, but in the way predators tense when they realize the thing in front of them might bite back. "I'm not here to scare you," the man said slowly, his voice steady, sharp like the edge of something hidden. "I'm here to make sure you understand something clearly, before it's too late." A deep, guttural laugh came from one of the outer seats. A Xerix delegate, with tendrils coiling around its throat like wet vines, leaned forward. "You dare threaten the Council?" it hissed. Another followed. "Your planet hasn't survived a single outer war." Then another. The chamber's noise swelled like a storm, words crashing into each other, mocking, arrogant, confident. The Council had heard threats before, empty ones, from broken worlds, from desperate creatures. But what they didn't understand was that the man wasn't desperate. He wasn't begging. He was warning. The speaker slammed a claw on the arm of his throne and the hall went silent again. "Then speak, human," he growled, Speak your warning before I let my fleets erase your little blue rock from existence." The man's eyes slowly swept across the tiers of alien faces, not like a prisoner staring at his captors, but like a judge weighing their worth. "Earth doesn't kneel," he said, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through the silence like a blade. A few delegates scoffed. Some muttered, but many just stared. Because something in his tone wasn't bluffing. It was the sound of someone who already knew what would happen if they ignored him. The Krauth warlord leaned closer, his sharp teeth bared. "Then prove it, soft thing. Prove your little warning means anything to the stars." The man didn't look at him. He simply pressed his palm against the black case. A hum filled the chamber, low and deep, like the sound of something waking beneath the floor, a vibration that crawled into bones and wrapped around the heart. Lights flickered briefly. The case glowed brighter. The speaker frowned. "What is that?" he demanded, but the man didn't answer. And just like that, the laughter died. No one moved. The hum wasn't loud, but it was powerful in a way words could never be. Everyone in that hall felt it. The kind of feeling that doesn't ask permission to be understood. It simply is. The man's voice returned, quiet, calm, steady. "This isn't a threat," he said. "This is the only warning you'll ever get. Do not cross Earth." And in that moment, in that massive chamber built to make others kneel, it wasn't the council that held power anymore. It was the humans standing alone at its center. The hum from the black case grew deeper, a pulse so low and steady it felt like it came from the bones of the chamber itself, not from the small object at the human's feet. A vibration that crawled into the floor, into the walls, and made even the most hardened warlords shift in their seats. They had seen weapons, they had seen bombs, but this was different. This wasn't loud, it wasn't violent. It was calm and cold, the kind of power that didn't need to shout to make its presence felt. The speaker gripped the railing in front of him with one long claw, the metal groaning softly beneath his hand. His mocking grin was gone now, replaced by a narrow, hard stare as he leaned down, his voice quieter but sharper. "What is this trick, human?" he hissed, his tone suddenly lacking the weight it carried before. The man did not look at him, did not answer. He just crouched down slowly, brushed the dustless floor with his fingertips, and tapped the black case once. The lights in the chamber dimmed at once, not flickering but fading in a controlled rhythm, as if something far bigger than their power grid had brushed against it. The stars painted across the ceiling shimmered like they were blinking for the first time, and then a projection burst into existence above the human's head, clean, cold, real, a three-dimensional hologram of a star system. At first the delegates laughed nervously, thinking it was a human attempt at showing their homeworld, but then the projection shifted, zooming out far beyond Earth's orbit, into the black void where most species never dared to look too long. There they saw them. Silent ships. Hundreds of them. Lining the darkness like jagged shadows wrapped around the edges of the solar system. No flags, no broadcast codes, no council identification, no signatures in their database. The fleets of Earth. The hidden armada. They had thought humanity had nothing, no empire, no reach, no teeth. But the ships looked nothing like the old, clumsy vessels the Council had seen during first contact years ago. These weren't explorers. These were hunters. Their black hulls drank the light around them. Their engines were silent, their shapes built for war. For the first time, someone in the upper tiers whispered, "That can't be real." But it was. The speaker stiffened, his narrow pupils dilating. He slammed a claw against the railing. "This is lies," he snapped, but his voice cracked slightly at the edges, because even he could tell it wasn't. No alien ship moved like those. No alien fleet radiated that kind of cold precision. The human straightened slowly, his boots echoing against the polished floor, and finally spoke again. "These ships have never crossed your borders," he said, his voice so calm it sent a shiver down the chamber. "They never needed to. We built them where you couldn't see. We waited. We watched." The Krauth warlord stood, his massive armored frame casting a shadow down the tiered hall. "This is a bluff," he snarled. "No human fleet could destroy a council armada." But the human raised a hand, and the projection shifted again. This time the image wasn't Earth's orbit. It was the cold edge of an unclaimed star system. A graveyard of ships. Hundreds of alien warships. Some still drifting in silence, their hulls split in half. Some gone completely. No survivors. The Council recognized the insignias. Fleets from various empires, raiding groups, privateers, all who had crossed near Earth's shadow over the past decades and never returned. A murmur spread through the hall, quiet but sharp, like knives scraping against each other. Delegates who had laughed minutes earlier now leaned forward, their eyes narrowing, their jaws clenched. Every empire had heard whispers of ships vanishing near the human sector, but they had treated it as myth, the way the powerful always ignore warnings they don't respect. Now those whispers stared back at them in the form of twisted metal and cold black space. The speaker tried to keep his voice firm, but the edges had cracked. "If this is real," he said slowly, "why show it now?" The human turned to him, his eyes steady, unblinking. "Because you're about to make the same mistake they did." The chamber fell silent. No laughter now. No insults. The Krauth warlord slammed a hand against the table again, but this time the sound didn't carry arrogance. It carried anger, the kind born from fear trying to disguise itself. "You dare threaten the Council," he growled. The human took one step forward. Just one. And the sound of his boot hitting the floor was louder than the warlord's fist. "I'm not threatening you," he said slowly, his voice colder than the void between stars. "I'm warning you. You built your power by crushing the weak. You made an empire out of fear. But Earth is not afraid of you." The speaker's jaw twitched. He had ruled the council chamber for decades, cowed hundreds of worlds into silence with a single gesture. But now he found himself gripping the railing tighter, feeling a sensation he hadn't felt in centuries, unease. "And if we don't listen," he said softly. The human tilted his head slightly, a small motion, but it carried more weight than 1,000 warships. "Then," he said, "you'll end up like them." He raised his hand and the projection zoomed back to the graveyard of ships, rotating slowly under the pale light of dead stars, silent proof of everything he just said. No dramatic explosions. No flashing warnings. Just the cold aftermath of what happens when someone crosses Earth. The Zyrix delegate, the one who had laughed earlier, pulled its tendrils closer to its chest without realizing it. The Krauth warlord didn't sit down, but he didn't move either. The speaker didn't hiss this time. The chamber, a place built to make others kneel, was now listening to a single human standing alone. The man's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "We don't seek conquest," he said. "We don't bow. And we don't forgive." And in that instant, the council understood why Earth had sent one man. Not an army. Not a fleet. Not ambassadors. Because only one was needed. The chamber felt colder now, the kind of cold that doesn't come from temperature but from something older, heavier. Like the air itself understood that the balance of power inside this hall had quietly shifted. The arrogant laughter was gone. The whispers had stopped, and every eye in that vast circular chamber was locked on the man who stood alone beneath the stardome. The black case still glowing faintly at his feet, the graveyard of ships still floating above him. Like a silent ghost hanging over the council's head. The speaker sat stiff on his throne, claws flexing slowly against the steel railing, his breath shallow though he tried to hide it. He had ruled this chamber through fear for decades. No one had ever dared to make the council sit in silence, and yet this human had done it without raising his voice, without shouting, without a single weapon. The Krauth warlord, who only minutes earlier had mocked him like prey, was still standing, but his hands were no longer resting casually on the table. They were clenched around its edges, heavy breathing pushing through his jagged teeth. "This is nothing but a story," he finally spat, his voice lower now, not filled with mocking thunder but something closer to anger holding back unease. "You destroy a few raiders, a few private fleets, and you think that gives your kind the right to speak to the council as if you are equals." His words echoed in the silent hall, and for a heartbeat, no one answered. Then the human took a single step forward. That single step echoed like the crack of stone under pressure, and every alien in the room felt it. The speaker narrowed his eyes, forcing his voice to regain its old weight. "You are bluffing," he hissed. "Earth is nothing. A single planet clinging to its fragile star, hiding in the shadows while real empires shape the galaxy." The man tilted his head slowly, like a predator studying a noise it has already decided is not a threat. Empires, he said, his voice soft but sharp, don't last forever. But warnings do. His hand moved, and the image of the graveyard shifted. It zoomed out, further and further, until the council saw something they had never expected. Beyond the graveyard of shattered ships floated another shadow, a ring of colossal, silent constructs orbiting at the edge of a black void. They weren't warships. They were something else. Massive structures, black as deep space, their designs completely alien to anything the council had catalogued. No glowing lights. No signs of life. Just black giants waiting. The entire chamber went still. The Xerix delegate's tendrils twitched nervously. One of the reptilian senators hissed softly. These weren't the weapons of a small, weak world. These were the signs of a power that had been growing silently where no one was looking. The speaker leaned back, his jaw tightening, his voice lower now. "What are those?" he demanded. But this time, there was no laughter beneath his question. There was only something cold. The human didn't answer immediately. He let them look at it. Let them feel that weight. Then he said, "The beginning of what happens if you cross us." The words weren't shouted, but they landed like a hammer striking stone. A murmur spread through the chamber, like wind racing through broken glass, small at first, then growing as the delegates whispered among themselves. The Andric speaker slammed a claw on the railing. "Enough," he hissed. "Do you think this performance scares us?" The man slowly lifted his eyes to meet his, and for the first time, the speaker faltered under someone's gaze. "I don't care if it scares you," the human said. "It's not a threat. It's a fact." The Krauth warlord's jaw clenched tighter, and for the first time in years, he didn't have something clever or cruel to say back. He had fought wars across star systems, had burned moons to ash, had broken fleets under his boots, but this human wasn't threatening him like the others had. He wasn't begging for survival. He was simply telling him how it would end. The Xerix delegate broke the silence, its tendrils shivering as it spoke. Why hide all this? Why wait? If Earth had this power, why not strike first? The human turned his gaze to the creature and answered simply, "Because Earth doesn't start wars. We finish them." The chamber went quiet again. This time it wasn't the cold silence of arrogance or mockery. It was the silence of realization. The council, the body that had controlled thousands of worlds through force and fear, was staring at something they didn't know how to control. A species that didn't follow their rules. A species that hadn't kneeled, begged, or joined. The speaker bared his teeth in frustration. "You're lying," he said, but even he didn't believe it now. His voice cracked on the last word. The human reached down slowly, picked up the black case, and held it with one hand. "Lies need noise," he said. "Truth is quiet." Something in the chamber shifted again. A few of the smaller empires, the ones who had been forced into obedience by the council, began whispering among themselves, not in fear, but in something else. Hope. If Earth could stand here alone and make the speaker himself tremble, maybe the council wasn't untouchable. Maybe power had a new center. The Krauth warlord slammed his hands down once more, but the sound didn't carry the same power anymore. It was loud, yes, but it didn't command the room. Everyone's eyes remained on the human. The speaker hissed, his long tail lashing against the floor. "You think we will simply let this insult stand?" The man didn't flinch. "It's not an insult," he said quietly. "It's a warning. The last one you'll get." The lights in the chamber flickered softly, but the power didn't come from the council's systems anymore. It came from something else, something waiting in the void. The alien delegates could feel it, even if they couldn't understand it. The galaxy had changed. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a war cry. It was a whisper, quiet but sharp enough to split an empire in half. And that whisper came from Earth. The hall no longer sounded like the council's chamber. It no longer carried the weight of their laughter or the easy confidence of an empire that had ruled through fear for centuries. Now it was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that sits heavy on the back of the neck, where even breathing starts to sound too loud. The delegates shifted in their seats, some trying to stay composed, others simply staring at the human as if seeing him for the first time. The speaker sat high above on his throne, claws digging into the armrests, the steel groaning softly beneath his grip. He had ruled through arrogance and fear, and in one night, a single human was making that throne feel smaller. The holographic projection of the graveyard of ships still hung in the air like a wound carved into the galaxy, each broken hull telling a story the Council had ignored for too long, a story of ships that went into the human sector and never returned. The Krauth warlord, who had spent his life fighting, burning, conquering, stared at the floating image with a clenched jaw. The Xerix delegate's tendrils twitched nervously against its pale skin. The speaker finally broke the silence, his voice low, sharp, laced with something that was not quite control anymore. "This is a display," he hissed, "a performance. You think showing us a few broken fleets will shake us?" The human tilted his head slowly, his eyes fixed on the speaker, his face as unreadable as the cold void between stars. He took one step forward, the sound of his boot against the floor echoing across the chamber like a single drumbeat. "No," he said softly, "I'm not here to shake you. I'm here to make sure you understand what happens next if you don't listen." His tone was steady, measured, not the voice of a man making a threat. It was the voice of someone telling the truth like a fact carved in stone. The speaker slammed a claw down on the railing and hissed, "You are nothing." But even as he shouted, the strength behind his voice cracked like ice under pressure. He was trying to reclaim the power of the room. But it wasn't his anymore. The human raised his hand slowly. The hologram changed again. This time the image zoomed out, further than they expected, beyond Earth's orbit, beyond the graveyards, revealing silent objects floating at the edge of known space. They weren't ships. They weren't stations. They were something far larger. Dark silhouettes against the stars, sharp like blades carved from black ice. And they were still. Silent. Watching. The chamber grew colder. The speaker leaned forward, his pupils narrowing, his voice a whisper now. "What are those?" The human answered without blinking. "The things we built when we decided we would never kneel to anyone again." The Krauth warlord slammed a fist against the railing, but it wasn't a confident gesture this time. It was a defensive one. Why build in the shadows? Why not fight? The human's gaze snapped to him. "Because predators make noise," he said, "but hunters wait." The room stilled again, every word settling into the walls like a slow hammer. A smaller delegate, one of the conquered worlds, whispered under its breath, "You've been preparing for this." The human didn't deny it. He didn't have to. His silence was enough. The speaker tried again, clinging to the last scraps of control. "The Council's fleets are endless," he growled. But this time there was no laughter backing his words, no thunder of support from the delegates. The power had shifted, and everyone in that chamber felt it. The human's eyes narrowed just slightly. "We don't need to destroy your fleets," he said slowly. "We just need to make you understand that if you cross Earth, the galaxy will never hear from you again." His voice was so calm that it made the words heavier. One of the delegates hissed nervously, "You wouldn't dare." And the human smiled, not wide, not warm, just a small, cold smile that made several hearts across the chamber skip a beat. "We don't dare," he said. "We warn." The room rippled with low whispers, but the sound wasn't mockery anymore. It was panic, quiet panic, the kind predators try to hide when they realize they might not be the apex anymore. The speaker opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out at first, and when they did, they sounded thinner. "You think one world can stand against the galaxy?" The human's voice didn't change. "Not one world. One promise. Cross us once, and your galaxy burns." The Krauth warlord lowered his head slightly, not in submission but in understanding. The smaller empires whispered faster now, some already calculating what this meant for their alliances, their fleets, their survival. The speaker slammed his claw down again, the sound loud, desperate. "You think we'll bow to you?" The man didn't blink. "I don't care if you bow," he said. "I only care that you remember." The chamber fell silent again, the kind of silence that stays long after the shouting ends, the kind that digs into memory and never leaves. A storm was moving through the galaxy, and the Council could feel it pressing at their walls. It didn't roar. It whispered. And its name was Earth. The speaker's throne no longer felt like a mountain. It felt like a cage, the weight of the silence pressing on every edge of the council chamber like invisible chains. The stars projected above them flickered faintly. The air heavy and still. Hundreds of alien delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but none dared speak. Their arrogance that had once filled every corner of this room had thinned out like smoke fading in wind. And at the center of it all, the human stood calm and unshaken, not roaring, not shouting, just existing with the kind of quiet certainty that makes even warlords hold their breath. The black case still sat at his feet, glowing faintly like an ember, and above him, the hologram of shattered fleets and black war constructs waited like ghosts circling their prey. The speaker gripped the arms of his throne, his claws carving faint lines into the metal as if that could help him hold on to what he was losing. His voice came out lower now, not a roar but a growl, thin and tense. "You think this makes you untouchable," he hissed. "You think one planet can hold an entire galaxy hostage." His words echoed through the empty space between them. But no one laughed anymore. Not a single delegate moved to back him. It wasn't fear of the speaker that held the room together now. It was fear of the man standing alone. The human tilted his head slightly, the motion small but heavy with meaning. His voice when it came was soft but sharp. "Untouchable?" "No," he said, "but we're not the ones who should be afraid of being touched." That quiet statement hit harder than any shouted threat. It landed in the hall like a blade driven into the table, and the sound of the speaker's breathing grew louder, harsher, even though he tried to hide it. The Krauth warlord finally broke the stillness, his voice lower than before, a tone that belonged to someone who'd seen too many wars. "If what you say is true, human," he rumbled, "why show this to us now?" His claws scraped against the steel of his armor. "Why not strike while you have the chance?" The human turned slowly to him, his gaze steady and cold. "Because we don't start wars," he said, "we end them. And we're not here to destroy the galaxy. Only to make sure it remembers not to cross us." Those words didn't sound like a boast. They sounded like a law. Not one that could be negotiated or debated, but one carved into the bones of history long before this night. A low murmur swept through the chamber again, nervous, uncertain. The smaller empires whispering among themselves, already feeling the shift in power rippling through everything they once believed was solid. The speaker slammed his claw against the armrest, the sound sharp and brittle, his voice cracking. "We have ruled for centuries," he snapped. "Our fleets blot out stars, our armies burn worlds, our council decides the fate of entire civilizations with a single vote, and you dare stand before us and act as if you can command us." His voice was louder now, but it wasn't power that filled it, it was desperation. The human didn't blink. "I don't need to command you," he said quietly. "I only need to warn you." The Krauth warlord's shoulders stiffened. The Xerix delegate's tendrils coiled tight against its skin. The others watched in silence, not sure which was more dangerous now, the speaker's rage or the human's calm. The man stepped forward, another slow, deliberate movement, each bootfall echoing like a drumbeat that swallowed the space around it. "You built your empire on fear," he said, "and you thought no one could ever make you afraid. That's why you don't understand what's happening right now." He raised his hand slowly and the projection shifted again, not just showing ships and fleets this time, but numbers. Tactical overlays. Systems marked in red. Strike routes plotted in silence years before this meeting. Places the council thought were untouchable. Gasps and whispers broke out. One of the delegates actually stood, its scaled skin flickering with shock. How do they know?" it started to say, before its voice died under the weight of the room. The speaker's eyes widened slightly, his claws still digging into the throne as the realization set in. Not only did Earth have the power to destroy fleets, they had been watching, listening, preparing. For years. Maybe longer. The human lowered his hand again, the images hovering quietly above him like a storm held on a leash. "We don't want your war," he said. "We don't want your throne. We don't want your council." His voice grew quieter, slower, each word like a stone dropping into deep water. "We just want you to remember what happens when someone crosses Earth." The silence that followed was heavier than anything before it. No one dared move. The speaker, for all his size, all his power, all his rule, suddenly looked smaller on his throne. The Krauth warlord sat down slowly, not in submission, but in understanding. The Xerix delegates' tendrils coiled tighter and tighter. The smallest empires leaned forward like prey, realizing a bigger predator had entered the jungle. The speaker finally managed to speak again, but the power was gone from his voice. "And if we ignore your warning," he rasped, his words trembling under the weight of the silence. The human's eyes didn't blink, didn't soften, didn't move. "Then Earth will make sure," he said, "that the galaxy forgets your name." No shouts followed. No roars. No mockery. Just silence, raw and wide and endless. The council had heard thousands of threats before, but never like this. Never this quiet. Never this real. And in that silence, every single one of them understood something they had spent centuries pretending wasn't possible. The galaxy's balance had shifted, and it hadn't required a war. Just a warning. A single human warning. The silence that filled the chamber now was not the silence of arrogance or superiority. It was the silence of a predator realizing it has just walked into the territory of something far older, far hungrier, and far more dangerous than itself. The kind of silence that tightens the chest and leaves no space for breath. Every eye in the chamber remained fixed on the human, their minds trying to grasp how one person had walked into the heart of galactic power and turned the air against them without lifting a weapon. The speaker, who had spent centuries controlling this room with nothing but his voice, now sat on his throne like a statue carved from brittle bone, claws digging deeper into the armrests, his body rigid, his mouth dry, his pride slipping through his hands like sand. His throat tightened with every second of quiet because he knew what this meant, and so did everyone else in that room. The Krauth warlord, who only hours earlier would have torn through entire systems without blinking, leaned forward on the railing, breathing heavily through his jagged teeth, his armor creaking softly under the weight of a silence he could not break. The Xerix delegate had coiled its tendrils so tight against itself they shivered, eyes darting between the human and the speaker like prey waiting to see which direction the blade would fall. The smaller empires, those who had been forced to kneel to this council long ago, watched with something else in their eyes, something sharp, dangerous, the kind of quiet hope that makes empires nervous. The human didn't move fast, didn't need to. He simply lifted the black case and held it at his side, letting the last projection fade until nothing remained above him but the reflection of starlight and the heavy silence of broken pride. His boots tapped once against the floor, a soft, clear sound that cut through the room louder than the speaker's voice ever could. "This is the only time I will speak here," he said quietly, each word like a blade dragged across glass, smooth but unrelenting. "The next time you hear from Earth, it won't be in a room like this." The speaker's breath came out shaky, a sound no one in the chamber had ever heard from him before. He straightened slowly, trying to find his voice again, trying to pull together the broken threads of his power. But when he spoke, his words didn't have the weight they once carried. "You're just one world," he hissed weakly. "You think a single species can stand against the galaxy." The man raised his head, not with fury, not with fire, but with a kind of quiet confidence that didn't need to prove itself. "You built your empire by making others afraid," he said, "but Earth doesn't fear you. It never did. And that's why you'll remember this day for the rest of your lives. Because fear is the only thing that keeps your council together. And once fear breaks," he let the sentence hang in the air, unfinished, but everyone understood how it ended. "Empires that live on fear fall in silence, not fire." The Krauth warlord slammed his fist against the railing, not to intimidate but to drown the tremor in his own chest. "If what you say is true, then why come here at all?" he growled, voice low, like a cornered beast. The human turned his gaze to him, calm, unshaken. "Because Earth gives only one warning," he said. "After that, it doesn't talk." A ripple moved through the chamber, not of sound, but of understanding. The smaller delegates who had been silent for centuries now saw the cracks in the council's armor. The great powers, once untouchable, now sat frozen, watching a single human walk circles around their arrogance. The speaker's claws clicked softly against the armrests, trying to keep his voice steady. "If you leave here believing we will bow to you, human, you're mistaken," he spat weakly. The man finally smiled. Not the kind of smile filled with warmth or arrogance. A cold, sharp smile that felt like the click of a safety being taken off. "I didn't come here for you to bow," he said. "I came here so when you look at the stars, you'll remember that there are places you do not touch. And Earth is one of them." The speaker felt his chest tighten. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a verdict. The human turned away from the throne without asking permission, without waiting for an escort, walking toward the great doors of the chamber with the same measured steps he had walked in with, calm and silent like a blade returning to its sheath. The guards didn't move to stop him. The speaker didn't command them to. No one in that chamber dared lift a finger. As the doors opened with a deep, resonant hiss, the light from the corridor outside bled into the hall, casting his silhouette long and sharp across the floor like the shadow of something far larger than one man. And in that moment, every delegate in the chamber understood something that none of them would ever admit out loud. The galaxy was no longer theirs alone. When the doors closed behind him, the chamber stayed quiet for a long time. No one dared speak first. The Zyrix delegate whispered softly, "What have we just seen?" And no one answered. The Krauth warlord's massive hand lowered slowly from the railing, his jaw tight, eyes dark with something he hadn't felt since his first war, doubt. The speaker sat frozen on his throne, claws still in the grooves he'd carved, staring at the empty space where the human had stood, his mind screaming for a way to reclaim control. But it was too late. The sound of the human's footsteps still echoed in the chamber like an aftershock. Far above the chamber, in the black between stars, hundreds of silent Terran ships waited in the dark, engines off, guns cold, patient like a beast watching hunters argue in its den. Earth didn't need to roar. Earth didn't need to march. It only needed to be remembered. And that night, the Galactic Council remembered. Not because of a war, but because of a warning. A single human warning that broke centuries of arrogance and left an empire shaking in its own silence.